Welcome, I'm David Greenfield. I'm the organiser of Circular Economy Club London, and we've got Circular Economy Club London Instagram Live Part 2. We're going to be discussing fashion and what fashion means in a COVID-19 world, but also what fashion means post-COVID-19. Welcome to everybody that's joining. Looks as though we've got some very interesting people on. This is very much about you getting involved in the conversation as well. So keep your questions coming through. We'll try and get to as many as possible. But we're gonna be online for 40 minutes or so, and try and give you a really interesting conversation. And today I am very, very pleased to be able to be joined by a fashion designer, a lecturer, and a consultant for sustainable solutions. And we will be inviting Katarina Rimarcikova to join us when I can actually work out how to bring her on board. Oh, there we are. That's right. And you can tell this is only our second time. I'm going to invite Katarina to join us now. Katarina's, it's a pleasure to have as one of the volunteers for the Circular Economy Club in London, and is probably one of the people that is most knowledgeable on fashion, sustainable fashion, and some of the trends, and particularly from a circular economy perspective, a designer, and how we can use design in the circular economy to ensure that we manage materials. So, Katarina, I'm just going to add you now.
Yes, that was fast.
Good afternoon.
Hello, hi.
Hi. So, welcome, Katarina.
Thank
I've
you.
given you a tiny little bit of an introduction, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what fashion means to you.
Gosh, that's a big one. Right, so I do a few things, as you mentioned, and I think that's really important for me to really understand the scope of fashion, what's going on, because it's been changing so much over the last decades. So I am always going to be a designer, the creative creature that I can't breathe without creating stuff. So that's been embedded in me from day one. But along the way, I started my business as a designer. I was more and more ambitious, really enjoyed the other side of fashion as well, the numbers and the kind of structure. And that kind of led me to work on different projects. And alongside that, I sort of fell into teaching, which was something I never thought about. But it was very interesting. And I got really hooked. I used to live in Paris, and from one day to another, I just became professor of draping. And that was very exciting. I was like, I like that. But it also...
draping, wow.
Yeah, that's what I got. That's the title. That was my first title.
For those of us that have got no idea what draping is, what is draping?
Okay, so draping is kind of considered as an art form because it's the way you construct clothes. So it's on the mannequin, on the static form, where you work with fabric and basically using 2D material to create 3D shapes. So it's really about this combination of, obviously talent, experimenting, but also really understanding fabrics and body movement, 3D. So it's something you can't just pick up like that. So it's a years of practice, and this is a technique that's very connected with Paris and with haute couture especially, but it's been obviously used across the board. But yeah, it's a passion of mine. Of course, it's part of my DNA as a designer. But yeah, in the last 10 years or so, I've been doing so many different things. I'm curious, and I love to use creativity on solving problems, and that's what really fashion is, and creativity. But we fell into very different systems with the fashion industry, global fashion industry, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. And I just love investigating, questioning things, and really connecting the dots between education, practice, and industry. So being able to work with many different brands, manufacturers, development of textiles and fabrics, innovation, working with a lot of non-for-profit organizations who are doing very strict audits and research that kind of keeps me on my toes, and I like to be informed, and because it's all about really having valid facts and correct information so we can make changes.
Brilliant. No, and I'm always fascinated by the work you've done, and it's a completely different world to one that I've grown up in or even considered. I've said to you many a times that I don't think of myself as being fashionable. And as you rightly say, everybody has their own interpretation of fashion. To me, fashion is catwalks, but fashion isn't just about catwalks, is it?
No, this is the thing that people like to think of it as something very different and not connecting to them, or many people, especially men, I have to say, or some groups of men that I came across anyways in my life at least. But it's very interesting how we are so disconnected, and let's just remind ourselves that we all wear clothes, and we've been wearing from the beginning of times. We draped ourselves in skins and furs, men and women. And, 2000 years later or so, we are still wearing clothes, and we make choices. And even if it's a functional garment or whatever you are buying, David, it's still a garment, and it's still part of fashion and fashion industry. And it has an impact on a whole supply chain of people behind it, and obviously environment.
Sorry, that was one of the major activities at the moment, where fashion has become such an important and publicly known topic, particularly in terms of sustainability. And we're having this conversation in Fashion Revolution Week.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about what Fashion Revolution Week is and why it's important to not just the fashionistas, but everybody?
Yeah, sure. So Fashion Revolution Week, this is the seventh anniversary, and it really started as a reaction to a quite horrific incident that happened in Bangladesh 7 years ago on the 24th of April, I think. Unfortunately, over 1,138 people died when 2 factories collapsed in Bangladesh. And this is something that obviously has happened before, but because it was such a scale, it finally drew the attention of press, international press. And despite the horrific tragedy, of course, at least there was an opportunity to shine a light on the practices and the terrible conditions of a lot of the subcontractors and third parties that are part of the supply chain, especially in the third world countries, and especially for fast fashion. So it kind of started this action and reaction to this incident, and really uncovering, who was responsible for that, trying to actually find brands who were directly working with that factory or those two. And it became a really complicated task because nobody really knew, and we started to realize that it's so complex and it's such a murky world of the supply chain that we, chasing the lowest price point and preying on the people who are so desperate to earn anything, and leading to working with children as well. So it actually led to a point where the investigators had to go through the rubbles and find the labels, or the garments with the labels, to actually look at the brands who were being produced in those factories. And when those brands, some of them were, most of them are very well-known brands such as H&M and Marks and Spencer, this was widely publicized. They even didn't know they were working with that particular factory. So this was the real start of demand for transparency. So Fashion Revolution was born as a reaction to this event. And it really started with this idea of using this date, the anniversary of this disaster, to highlight the practices, the workers, and really kind of start to connect the people behind making the garments that we enjoy and pay so little. So it started literally with a hashtag called "Who Made My Clothes?" And over the 7 years, it's amazing to see that it grew into this amazing global organization with incredible sort of army of volunteers around the world. So you have Fashion Revolution hubs all around, obviously major fashion cities, but beyond. They have done incredible body of work in terms of research, publications, and the call for transparency and highlighting the unsustainable and unethical practices. And because it's a non-for-profit organization and non-governmental organization, it's really important that they have done this work so we can build on this. And it grew into a week of events. And normally, under normal circumstances, we would have incredible week of talks and showrooms and events. And it's all about obviously mending and repairing and learning. But this year, it's online, but still, the voice is here. So the big thing to do really is to think about the clothes we're wearing, who made them, do we know that? And if not, we have the power of our voice and social media to ask brands to publish or to disclose their supply chain, because they shouldn't be hiding it. So that's the premise.
That's so useful to hear the story in detail, because I've never heard it in that detail. So I knew some of that, and I think many a cynic might think that something like a Fashion Revolution week is about the fashion industry just wanting to greenwash. I think the premise of why Fashion Revolution Week is so important is because it's based out of a tragedy. So that's so helpful to know. And I think hopefully for our listeners, really interesting, and a stark warning about some of the major problems that the fashion industry have had. And one of the reasons why I'm really keen in fashion and circularity is because you've mentioned a number of things there, which circular economy is very much about the impact on social, the impact on materials, the impact on the economy, and the impact on the environment. And we know that the fashion industry is probably, in many cases, the biggest polluter. It has some of the lowest social welfare in the world in terms of its workers. So for me, it's such an intrinsically necessary conversation to have, and using a tragedy to have that conversation is, I think, so important.
And it's really important to kind of demystify some of these things, and especially connect how, you know, buying all these clothes that we do on such a scale that have such an enormous impact on so many different aspects, but mostly, as you said, environment and people. And just to point out a couple of things that come to my mind, about 80% of all workers in the fashion supply chain globally, it's women. 80% are women, and a lot of them, I mean, we're talking millions, are mistreated, underpaid, you know, not having access to health, etc., etc. So, you know, we've been exploiting this model. And, you know, be honest with you, I mean, if we are really calling it as it is at the moment, the fashion industry and many others, but we're talking about fashion today, it's still predominantly running on the linear model. Which is the opposite of circular, and it's this incredibly wasteful and exploitational model, and we are doing the opposite of, you know, taking from nature in such a vast quantities, and it seems like we're not really thinking about where it's going, and, you know, it doesn't disappear, it doesn't go away. And then also, you know, fashion is about people, right? And specifically, but we end up really affecting people in a very negative way on so many different levels alongside the supply chain.
Yeah, and I think that it's so important as somebody who rarely buys clothes, which is probably my contribution to circularity.
You're doing a little less evil.
Yeah, and when I do buy clothes, I try to buy recycled or remanufactured, and the materials that they're used from. For me, as somebody who's a very large, has a very large build, it's not easy to get clothes that fit, let alone clothes that are made of sustainable materials. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have when we've got the high street open. But now that we're online because of the pandemic, what's happened to fashion in the last 6 to 3 months, 6 weeks to 3 months, as a result of actually not being able to go and physically pick up clothes.
Yeah, that's a really interesting situation we find ourselves in, all of us, most of the world really. And that's been a real shift, of course, a real reaction from fashion industry. So first of all, in terms of the business, because it's so global and so international, and most global brands have 20, 30 countries involved in the process of making their collections, there was immediate impact of deliveries and delays, because just to remind ourselves that still about 50% of all global textiles is made in China, and about 48% of all garments globally are made in China. So that
50%,
yeah.
50.
50, yes, yes. And I can make one more point that I think we need to keep thinking about that as well, and we can end with that as well in terms of choice of fabric, because you mentioned that. So globally, we make around 63% of all textiles from oil, so synthetics, 63%, wow, in comparison to 1.2% of wool that it's being used globally. So it's really shocking. We need diversity and we need to address that. So it really starts with that. But what is happening right now? So it started with the China, of course. So we start to see the delay for most of the fast fashion brands, or brands who are working with China. There's a lot of them, obviously, because of the sheer numbers. So delays, of course, and then eventually shutting down businesses and moving everything online. But for fashion, as it's not necessarily essential goods, it started to create this problem of delays and, you know, stopping the seasons. We had fashion weeks running in February and March. They kind of got cancelled, and, you know, these unprecedented things happened that never happened before. And be honest with you, some of us were quite excited about the fact that we are finally having a break, and, you know, this imposed break, that it's so needed, that we've been making our excuses, especially in fashion industry, like, oh, we can't, we have to keep chasing, you know, and there's this, it's faster, you know. I mean, some of the brands such as Zara or H&M, they're making up to 52 collections per year. That means a single collection every week. So, online e-commerce retailers such as Boohoo or any other of those, they're making up to 700 new styles every week. So it's just a sheer number of it. It's insane. You know, we don't need more clothes.
I agree. It's completely insane. And for some of us that, when I did have black hair, which was in the last millennium, I think we were talking about 1 or 2 fashion cycles a year. So going to 52 is insane.
Yeah.
Into 700,
yeah,
it's mad.
And so all of that, so imagine all of this was happening pre-pandemic, and then slowly, you know, from the East shutting down companies and manufacturers, it led to chaos, obviously. And then essentially all of this was happening and slowly started to shut down and being cancelled. So one of the major problems that we've seen was major global brands canceling their orders in millions, right, with specifically countries such as Bangladesh, India, and any other third world countries that they're producing with for the sheer price point. So this was something that had a direct impact on millions of people working in that fashion manufacturing. And I mean, we're talking, you know, Primark was $235 million cancellation from one day to another. So it's a huge amount of money for those countries, or for any country really. And so what happened though was thanks to Fashion Revolution and other platforms, they've been called out. There's been some kind of access and information that who didn't pay up because of for all the work that's been done, monitoring and trying to help some of these workers and factories, specifically in Bangladesh, because that was highlighted so heavily in the press. And I mean, you know, it's the crazy idea of that, you know, all these companies making millions of pieces, specifically made fabric, specifically made garments for these brands, and they cancel in the middle of the runs, and they're not going to get paid until the shipment is with the brand. So they've done all this work and suddenly they have nothing. So from one day to another, there's no money to buy food or survive, and those countries are going also into quarantine. So the direct impact of those decisions was just shocking, and it was literally affecting people so severely. So, but I'm pleased to say that there's been some call out. There's been a lot of action online, hashtag pay up. But I'm pleased to say that I have seen now in the papers and in sort of industry news that Primark is owning up to these orders, and some of them are following as well. And I think that will be another thing that for consumers to ask their brands and demand, and make sure that they don't buy for people who have directly affected others in this, in this really scary times that we all are affected. So we should be more compassionate to those people who are, part of their supply chain.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I think beyond when COVID-19 finally doesn't have such a big impact on our daily lives, hopefully many of the consumers will have a long enough memory to remember those businesses that haven't been, let's say, doing the right thing. And yes, there's a delicate balance between commerciality and doing the right thing in a pandemic. We've seen this with other industries. There's been calls for certain pub chains across the UK that put all of their staff on, not even furloughed them, and just put them out and said, go and get a job somewhere else. I hope that many people will have that long enough memory. I don't think it will happen for everybody, but hopefully. I suppose one of the other good things, I suppose, that's come out of the pandemic is we've started to see, particularly some of the British brands, changing their business model to actually help the NHS. And that might only be a couple of things. And have you seen much of that, or is that just a few examples that we've seen in the press?
Yeah, there's been some good movement. British Fashion Council did a call up pretty much early on to round up designers and brands who have access to small manufacturing, who have fabrics and leftover elastics. So there's been a really nice movement. Designers got together, and there's a real sense of community and using our skills and materials to help others. A lot of people have been making scrubs, and very fashionable fabrics have been used for those things. So that's a lovely thing to see. And there's so much positive that it's happening in fashion. I mean, with major brands and luxury brands switching to really help making purposeful things, like famously LVMH switched to the perfume production to making the sanitizers, hand sanitizers, and now also masks and scrubs, etc. So there's been a really positive movement as well. But of course, speaking of furloughing, I have to mention this because it's not been sitting well with me, and it's a really interesting also question for fashion, because it is connected to ethical practices and sort of moral responsibility, I think. So I don't know if you've seen, but I certainly been aware of this way too much. Some brands, well, I'm going to mention because it's the I have to. It's been in the news. Well, famously, Victoria Beckham and Stella McCartney used the government furlough scheme. Victoria Beckham was her 30 staff team, and Stella McCartney about 480 people. And there was a huge backlash, where they are worth of millions. Her own handbag collection is worth £1.5 million, and, they are spending a lockdown in luxury. And she is choosing to use government's money, which is dedicated to people who are really struggling. At the same time, her brand has never made profit, so it's kind of perceived more like a vanity project. So it's a very interesting topic, but I think it's really important that we talk about it because and actually a lot of people have been questioning that her decision, and she got a lot of backlash for this. And and again, I think now going forward, I think we have the opportunity to really think about who we want to spend the money with. You know, that we love things, we want to buy things, and you know, after this gets better, I'm sure a lot of people want to treat themselves, you know, and buy something new for the next holiday, whenever that's going to be, or you know, a next event. But I think we have this amazing opportunity to really kind of question where we put our money, so we can, as we say, vote with our wallet.
Yeah.
And you know, empower those brands who have done it right, you know, who stuck by their employees, who pay everybody correctly and well, who did amazing projects throughout this pandemic. You know, so I think there's a lot that we can do as consumers.
And I think that one of the questions that comes through is actually in that sort of ilk, but actually asking for the culprits rather than mentioning the culprits. Tell us who you think have been some of the stars of the fashion industry during the pandemic, and that you would encourage consumers to go and use afterwards.
Ooh, okay. Well, there's a whole spectrum, but I was just reading actually what's been happening in the last 3 weeks online, because obviously we are still shopping online, and there's been obviously surge of activewear and loungewear.
Yes.
Fair enough, and a lot of gym equipment and stuff like that. But we, you know, we're going to still shop later on, and who is good, who is bad. I mean, that, you know, it's not black and white, of course.
No.
I think for me, what I would say, what is nice to see that some of the luxury brands stepped up, which I would expect personally. Maybe not everybody would be willing to do it, but you know, when you have luxury brands which are performing really, really well with they, you know, $1 million bonuses and, you know, amazing revenues, I think it's the first thing you do. It's to do a pay cut on your own salary as a CEO and cover your staff, and that's been done, you know, by Caring, for example. But I would think about the small independent brands. You know, they're either listed on platforms, you know, apps like Good on You or Wolf and Badger. These independent retailers, you know, with brands who are doing it in small quantities, beautifully, you know, well made in London, with quality fabrics, who are actively trying to be more sustainable, because nobody is. Let's just be real about that. And no brand is 100% sustainable within fashion. Small brands can do it better. So I think for me, it's about questioning. You know, the way I see that this time, this forced break, as I call it, or well, break, time out from real life, let's say, it gives us opportunity to really reevaluate our wardrobe. You know, suddenly we are forced to stop, and we don't have to buy this fast fashion that many of us would be doing because we feel like we have to have a new outfit for the next party, for the next ring. We don't need that right now. So maybe really start with a wardrobe at home, you know, just to see like, okay, I have this time to really look at what I've got here, and then think about it. Well, can I sell something off? Can I donate something? Oh, actually, I love this piece. I want to wear this more often. So, you know, I think it's connecting with your wardrobe first thing, because it should be about having a relationship with the clothes, you know, that you should buy because you love it, or you appreciate it, or you need it, and you enjoy it, you know. And then really take your time to do some research. You know, if the next item you want to be, I don't know, a sustainable pair of jeans, do a little bit more research, because we have a little bit more time now, you know, there's no rush per se. So it's very hard for me to say which brand is better or worse. I mean, there are affordable brands that are still online, they are selling well, but it's, for me, it's about really making that extra effort to read about the brand, to really question their practices, to see, you know, if they have all the disclosed information, you know, even start a communication with them that, you know, is it really made from this, or where does it come from? And I think more you compare, more you get to see as a consumer what feels right, you know. And again, I think it's this, as a designer myself, you know, I know how it is, and I work with a few small brands who are obviously really struggling right now. And they're doing it right. They have small quantities, you know, beautiful fabrics. There are the premium, better fabrics, whatever that means, on different levels. and they need the support. So maybe let's think about it like, can we find something better in a local brand, you know, a local designer, and invest into a piece that actually helps them as well, and we would enjoy wearing it.
And I think you've picked out two things which are really interesting. One, which relates to some of the questions that are coming up. And apologies to anybody who's French. I'm just about to pronounce haute couture. Uh,
Haute couture, yeah.
how can we incorporate recycled content? How can we incorporate biodegradable content? So looking at sustainable materials within high-end small batch fashion. And I think another point that you made, which is really important from a circular economy perspective in terms of how we think about the materials and the clothes that we use, is you mentioned a term, investing in fashion. I think for me, that's an exceptionally important point. And I don't know if you can just unpack a little bit of the recycled content and biodegradable, and then look at how we invest in fashion. There's possibly different business models. So moving to a leasing model rather than a purchasing model. Let's start with biodegradable and recycled in haute couture.
Okay, haute couture. There, it's it's complicated. So there's no straight answer. I mean, it starts with materials. Material and choice of material is extremely important because it can make up till 95% of an impact of the garment long term. So, you know, there are some amazing fabrics out there now, which are, and especially fibers, starting with fibers, and then made into still validated and certified organic, biodegradable, compostable, etc., etc. But of course, it depends what happens to them and what happens to the garment, how it's made, and you know, it still depends what the garment is for, how long we use it, or it's intended to be worn. So it is very complex, and this is the thing. That's why it's so difficult for fashion to become more sustainable and, you know, more using recycling, because first thing is that we still struggle to have all the information in terms of how fabrics are made, what chemicals go into them, etc. So that hinders on the progress of recycling on the other end. But I want to point out also there's some amazing innovations, a lot of startups looking into being able to break down and recycle any kind of garments in the near future. So that's the hope for all of us in fashion.
And I think just from a circular economy perspective, I know that one of the main barriers to recycling is multi-layering. So some garments may have a very recycled material in them, but if they're layered with the wrong thing, then everything goes into the bin.
Exactly. And most of the fabrics are blends because we perfected this system of making everything with synthetics. So that's why it's so hard to go off that roundabout of that. But coming back to the recycling and the upcycling. So, I mean, this is another thing. There are new designers, especially in UK, who are really pushing upcycling and customizing. And it doesn't even have to be, I mean, haute couture, it's a very strict definition for Bague Parisian Fédération. So that's a one thing. We use it in a maybe slightly looser context within this conversation, but it's really about having one-off pieces that are beautifully recycled and remade into something that has got obviously higher quality. And, you know, there's so many people who say we love fashion, but they keep buying, you know, disposable fashion that has got no value really. So it's about the perception of things, like, you know, and that's what I meant as well by investing. I mean, we should have an emotional connection and question ourselves, like, why do we want this piece? It should be long-term, and therefore it should be more expensive, whatever that means, because I always used to question when I don't buy much myself, but I'm obsessed with shoes, for example. So I would say I would buy the expensive shoes, the high-end quality, because I would say, well, I would wear it at least 50 times. So divided by 50, you know, I would get, you know, £2 per wear, whatever. So, you know, you can really quantify it somehow or think about it really, that do I really want this? Do I need this? And if I do, I want to save up, or I want to, you know, now we have this program of paying in installments, which is more and more popular. There are platforms that are reselling luxury goods or high quality goods, and that leads to resale and renting. So renting is obviously currently on hold for obvious reasons, but it's definitely something that will be explored and will be growing in the future, because there is so much stuff out there basically, and especially now, post pandemic, all these brands globally have so much stock, so there'll be huge discounting culture going on. And I guess I just would mention that let's not fall for that again, you know, because not just because it's cheap we shouldn't be buying, you know, 3 4 5 garments if we just need one. So again, questioning why we need things. And here I think the sharing platform can be really beneficial for all of the brands to really think about how they can get rid of their stock, to actually have a sharing collections online alongside selling as well. So there's something, you know, so every crisis offers an opportunity, and especially for fashion, we should be looking at it as a opportunity to be more creative and find new avenues and revenues without damaging the planet and using what we've got. Because unfortunately, the model, it's so unhealthy that not just we just make a lot of stuff, but we make too much. So there is overproduction basically happening. So I don't know why we can't fix it. It's very complicated, but the point is that there's so much waste that happens. There's so many garments that go straight to landfill without even being sold or worn, and that's the tragedy of it, really. So again, I think with every purchase we should think about it, that we have responsibility. And now as wearers, as owners of our current wardrobes, we're contributing to environmental issues by washing synthetics and, you know, how we treat them. So again, there's so much we can think about and do while we on the pause at home, how we can do better and how to learn new habits. You know, as they say, like it takes 21 days to learn new habits. So this is a great opportunity to kind of rethink how we start to love and connect with the clothes and things we have.
And that's so important. And we've got a bit more time left. There's a couple of questions that have come through, or points actually. One from Jane Dennison, who's noticed that H&M have increased their range with recycled material. I can see from your look that's probably a loaded question in terms of, yes, they might have increased their range with some recycled materials, but does that go back down to actually they're using multi-layering and therefore, or are they actually really doing the right thing?
Again, it's a very complex question, and you know, we can't say that they are bad or they are good. With H&M specifically, they've been looking into sustainability for years now, and I mean, at the beginning it was completely shambles. You know, it was sort of like doing a one competition with students and calling it sustainability tick kind of thing. But they've done a huge progress. But the problem with the conscious collections that they have and some of the materials they're using, it's such a small percentage from all the production that they do. Last year they produced 600 million garments. I mean, how is this like even like okay somehow? So that really just stops there for me, you know, that's not sustainable, full stop, you know. So no matter how many good materials you use, because it ends up in the landfill very, very soon afterwards. But just to be more objective with H&M, I mean, they are doing a lot of investment into the startups and the technology for recycling. So they understand that if they don't build a system for them, they're not going to be around for years to come. So there is a progress, and they're investing into a lot of recyclable fibers, or infinity fibers as we call them. Yeah. So, you know, you can still make a better choice within H&M. If you go there, if you decide to go there, you can still choose, you know, a garment that it's made from 100% natural material, you know, rather than synthetics or blends. I would say that's a starting point.
That's really helpful. And this Steve down on the south coast has been asking a couple of questions, so I'll pick up his last one. I think it links really nicely. You mentioned the 600 million garments. Is that down to the fact that they're just very poor at forecasting demand, or is it because it's easy to overproduce because it's so cheap to
Yeah.
produce?
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, that's the culture and the structure that we developed, and we perfected it pretty well in the last 50 years. This kind of bulk production and bulk buying. So it starts with materials, and then the manufacturing systems. You know, you have most of the big manufacturers in the world. It's minimums in thousands of meters or thousands of pieces, and this is how you drive the price down. So it's very hard to then retrieve from that when we perfected it so well. This kind of, and obviously it offered opportunities and exploration and exploitations in many different countries and regions. So for many brands who are obviously driven by price points and growth and profits, it's impossible for them to stop or retrieve, no matter how much they know that they have to, or they should. So it's a very difficult battle that we're fighting here. It's this contradiction, that on one hand I wish we could just like rebuild everything from scratch, but we can't. But it's getting more and more clearer that some of the statistics are now coming up, because obviously it's very difficult to quantify some of these issues within fashion because it's so opaque and it's so global. One of the terms that we've been using, which is actually not really correct because we can't prove it, that fashion is second most polluting industry. It is one of the biggest, of course, but it's been quantified that textile industry is more polluting and produces more CO2 than international flying and shipping combined. That gives us an idea. And also, if we go by the current consumption and production worldwide, we would need 3 more planets by 2050. This is a UN report. Wow. So, basically, we can't go on like this. And obviously, many brands who are making still profits and are thinking short term, they don't want to necessarily change because the change is really difficult and it takes a lot of effort. And actually, the point is that it's a collaborative effort. If one company changes it or one fabric is made better, it doesn't matter if the whole system is not changed. This is the sad thing that I see, that I know a lot of fiber manufacturers who do beautiful fibers made by circular systems, and there's no chemicals, the water is recycled, etc., etc. But then if they are not used correctly, in terms of that they go into production of textiles that are treated chemically and end up, being polluted and being then thrown away within 6 months, it completely defend the objective. So, yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the things everybody that's watching this today you've mentioned, for example, some of the things that people can do while they're in lockdown. So go and do an analysis of your wardrobe, work out what you haven't worn for years, what you may never have worn. I think there's a statistic that most people have got at least 10 items in their wardrobe that they've never worn. Some probably significantly more than that. What else can we all do individually to try and look at fashion from reducing the impact it has on the environment immediately and longer term?
Okay, so again, stop buying, basically. Think about what you can use, what you have. And obviously, we all have synthetics in our wardrobes. That's not going away from that. All active wear and sportswear and things like that, minimum. Washing synthetic fibers sheds microfibers into the water stream, which is now a known fact, and I'm sure you know that very well as well. So the next thing would be to buy those special bags that you can buy anywhere now online to protect the water from the washing machine or in the washing machine. So basically take a little bit more accountability for the clothes we have and how we look after them. Less dry cleaning, for example, or only green dry cleaning. Or be honest with you, I'm a luxury designer and I'm all about quality and looking after clothes, but I just use good old steam and shower and steam as a iron, because that's what it needs. A good fabric, especially natural fiber fabric, needs hot water, but hot steam coming
Yeah.
through that, and that's enough. Really, we've been brainwashed to believe that we have to wash it so often and dry clean it, everything. So I think that's the number one thing that we can all do every day, to question, really read the labels, that, and think about what's the lowest point for washing and stick with that. And that makes a huge difference. If you do it every day, everybody, it reduces our CO2. So that's really important, because apparently about 30% of the garment's CO2 impact is when we are actually wearing it and using it. So that's a huge responsibility we have.
Huge responsibility. And
And
of course, wear clothes for much longer than one wearing.
Exactly. Minimum 30 wears, as we say, sort of like as a kind of as a guideline, that, I wear my ones for years, so I'm hoping that it's more than that. But as a guideline or minimum sort of standard, I would say it's a good one to use, because believe it or not, a lot of people wouldn't, probably wear some of the, because we've been conditioned, unfortunately, by fast fashion and e-commerce to keep buying and, disposing. And the other thing that we need to be responsible for, because brands are still not responsible, it's how we dispose of clothes.
Absolutely.
So of course it's not easy. We don't have the system fully developed yet, but there are clothes banks. There are events that will be coming up after all of this, when we are free and we can mingle and all that. There are opportunities to get hand our clothes or collect the clothes. There are applications that collect it for you. So there's a lot we can do, and we can actually earn money from that as well.
Brilliant. Well, and I think that's so important. I'm very conscious of the time, Katarina. You've answered so many questions and given us such an insight into the world of fashion and the world of circular fashion. And there's still lots of questions coming through, which what we're going to do as the Circular Economy Club London is to gather those questions and then revisit circular fashion in a few weeks' time. Maybe introduce some other guests and explore some of the more specific questions that we've seen about materials possibly and developing a circular economy model. Can you answer one very quick question, which Anna's asked, which is, what is green dry cleaning?
There are a couple of dry cleaners that are in London, for example. There's one in Shoreditch, that they use non-toxic chemicals or natural ingredients for the dry cleanings. That's the labeling these days, of course, which is a major shift, because everything else is centralized dry cleaning that uses quite toxic chemicals, not necessarily to our skin yet, maybe, but for the environment.
Okay, no, that's really helpful, and thank you. And Steve's just made a very important point, which is, I think, disposal and terminology is so important, because actually, when your clothes get to the end of their life with you, in many cases, they've still got an opportunity for another life. And clothes swaps, donating to charities. Chrissy Oakfield just said she takes all of her clothes to charity shops.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
Think about what the next life for all of the materials, all the clothes that you've got. That's so important. Disposal is a word we don't want to use in clothing, really. It's something that we, as you rightly say, we've got some choice editing that we can do ourselves. We can decide what we do, when we do it, and as long as we've got the right information, I think most people will try and do the right thing. So, any last words you want to leave us with?
I think we should just be more connected with what we eat, wear. I mean, skin is our largest organ on our body. We should really care what we put on, So I just want to remind people of that this all connected. We are part of nature. It's the Earth Week. It's what is happening right now. So it's about taking a step back and think about, we're still going to buy and enjoy. We should enjoy fashion and we should buy things, but we can do better. And we should do better. We have an impact, and every choice has a direct impact or consequence. And with our choices, we can make something better as well. And while looking fabulous, obviously.
Fabulous, indeed. And that's a perfect note to say thank you very much, Katarina. You've been
Pleasure.
brilliant, so informative. I've learned a huge amount, and
Good.
looking at questions, people have learned a huge amount, and I've got further questions, and I'm going to look into this. I haven't heard of this from Pareto Clothing, which is a closet mass index from dirtylaundry.nl to assess your closet. Might be worth. I don't think it will take long for me.
We might put up some links maybe in a near future for our followers. So keep following us. And
yes, absolutely. So to all of you that's followed, thank you so much. We are going to dial off now, but we're going to do this every week. So next week, we're going to be talking about a completely different part of the circular economy, which is about how you collect waste. And the volunteer team that we've got in the London Circular Economy Club is full of experts, and they're so diverse. So we're going to be talking to a commercial recycling company that's based in London next week via Jess, and exploring what COVID has meant to them, but also explore some of the challenges that have been going on in the waste industry, the resources industry over the last week. It's been really transformational. And I think what we've seen, just as a prelude to next week, is for the first time in many, many, many years, people have started to understand the role that refuse collectors and recycling collectors have.
Indeed.
An essential industry. So I'm going to say thank you very much to Katarina. Thank you very much to everybody that's been watching, asking questions, waving back at us, and somebody's going to have to tell me what the little question mark double thing is in the Instagram live, but we'll work that out. So thank you all very much. Stay safe, everybody, and we'll see you very soon.
Yes, bye everybody.